I'm Andrew. You may already be aware that the Guide to the Ordinal Resource Library podcast is created by the enigmatic artistic genius Vvinni. Well, I was there from the very beginning. Well, not the very beginning, as we'll find out in this interview, but close to the beginning. I went to high school with Vvinni, and we've known each other for a really long time. Today, it's going to be my pleasure to bombard Vvinni with questions about this wonderful show. I hope it's not too meandering, and I hope you don't find me tedious. Here we go.
Question time!
I'm trying to figure out how to get the ball rolling here. It's odd being on someone else's podcast and like taking the reins and running the conversation. But first of all, I want to say that I'm thrilled that you have me on, and I've been thrilled to be a part of this project from the very beginning. And it's so exciting to hear these episodes as they've come out. I'm so excited that there's going to be a season 2 that's really, really lovely. I guess we'll start big. Can you tell me about like the origins of GUrRL, the podcast, and like kind of where these characters and where this world came from?
Yeah. So like the absolute origins of this are the stories that I would tell when I was pretty much on my own in my room playing with my toys as a kid. I was kind of a lonely kid. Mostly it was just me and a bunch of animal toys. I did have one friend who kind of helped me tell these stories. And so, like, when I graduated from college, kind of zipping forward,
Okay, but I have to interrupt here first because I'm curious, like, how old would you have been when you kind of started imagining this world?
Yeah, I think I started imagining this world probably when I was like 4, like all the way from 4 to like 14.
Wow.
Yeah. So yeah, it was like, if not a decade, pretty close to it, of just like telling consistent stories in my room, like little animals who all had like their own names. There was crab guy, starfish guy, lobster guy, corgi guy, and much later, like after that was using like little plastic animals that I get from the nature store. But later I actually got Sculpey, and I started like sculpting my own characters, my own toys as well out of it and everything, and that kind of opened up narrative possibilities. And like I would just kind of and tell stories, basically like space opera stories about like these animals going on these grand adventures with each other and like visiting other planets and other worlds. And like zipping forward to college, then me and my childhood friend that I told these stories with, we kind of grew apart, and I was thinking about ways to kind of reconnect, and also like kind of what kind of creative projects I wanted to do now that I graduated and what I wanted to devote my time to. And my brain kept on going to these stories, to the countless hours that I'd spend playing with toys in my room. And I came to the conclusion that if this was something that's interesting to me at the time, then maybe it would be something that's interesting to other people. And so I contacted my friend. He eventually decided that he didn't really have time for it, that he was kind of busy and everything, and that the whole reconnection angle didn't really work out. But I kept on thinking about ways to adapt these stories, like ways to canonize events, to kind of sort through like all of the inconsistencies and make a consistent canon and what that would look like. And so yeah, I got to work. Eventually, I settled on the fact that I wanted to make this into an animated series called Black Box, which would follow a crab, a lobster, and a starfish as they flew around in space in a very cubic spaceship. And yeah, I started working. I did a bunch of research into like how shows are developed, what you need. I started working on a series Bible and episode descriptions, characters, and that's kind of where the framework for GUrRL and the ordinal systems came from. Figuring out logistics and figuring out like how everything all came together. Because throughout the decades of playing with toys in my room, like there would be characters who would behave one way in one context, another way in another context. Even though they were the same toy, they'd behave differently. And so like figuring out like who these characters were, what I was interested in, and when you're a kid, you don't like think too much about like deep characterization and who they are and how this like communicates in a show setting. So I kind of also like started to figure out like what I wanted to say with this world, what I wanted to do with it, what kind of themes I wanted to play around with, and everything. And so, yeah, I kind of started ironing out characters, starting getting it all together. I worked for a long, long time building up this world, and I went into a bunch of different corners and a bunch of different places that we'll talk about later in this interview. But eventually, though, through researching and through reading and everything, I kind of came to the conclusion that it's exceedingly difficult to get a show made if you're not working with a existing IP and if you don't already have a name for yourself.
Yeah.
And so I started to think about other ways to use this. How else I could bring this world into existence. And eventually I kind of settled on the podcast format. Mostly I settled on it because it seemed like something small. It seemed like something that I could do on my own because I wasn't sure how many other people I could get involved in this. So I started working on figuring out how to translate everything I was doing about a show into a podcast. I decided that I wanted it to not be a lot of different voices. I wasn't just going to take the scripts that I wrote for the show, but make it into an audio drama. Because once again, I wasn't sure how many people I could get involved in this. Especially early on, I was basically operating under the assumption that I would be doing everything. That I'd be doing the voices, I'd be doing the recording, I'd be doing literally everything on this. I don't remember if there were any false starts. I remember I was thinking about having it be something closer to Hitchhiker's Guide, where there's like actual like agents who work for this library who go out and like take notes and edit this encyclopedia and things like that. And so like my very first ideas were kind of just having it be in like a field note format, where it's just kind of like a bunch of field notes about like different things in this world. But eventually I kind of settled into this idea of GUrRL and what GUrRL became, which is basically the idea of edutainment. Having a sentient Wikipedia, but also a sentient Nova program that comes into your classrooms and gives you information that's probably way above your class grade, but teachers are kind of overworked and tired and they just want to put something on and grade papers for a little bit. So, that's kind of how GUrRL came. And at the time I was working in education as well. And so that kind of also helped like kind of sort through these feelings of frustration and these feelings of just feeling completely overworked and overwhelmed and not really knowing you had to interact with children and knowing you had to teach them something, but not exactly knowing how to, and not having this framework for how to do it. So I worked with all of this. I started to figure it out, and eventually I came to the character of GUrRL.
I'd love to talk a little bit more about the character of GUrRL.
Yeah,
it's like, so I think one of my favorite things about this podcast is that GUrRL starts as this sort of like kind of faceless, nominally identityless narrator, in the way that like a lot of science documentaries have this sort of authoritative narrator who's just like giving you facts. But then as we go along, GUrRL's personality really begins to flourish, and we start to hear about like what do they want and what are they interested in, and kind of how does that conflict with what their job is. There's a little piece of dialogue that I think really encapsulates what GUrRL is all about.
Why did we learn how to build a doomsday device?
Because it is information, and information can only be good. Yep.
Which is like, that's sort of a flawed worldview, but I really respect such a clear statement of purpose for a character. Are there other qualities that like you really came to love about GUrRL as you continued to write them?
Yeah, definitely. I think one of the qualities that I absolutely love about GUrRL is their emotionality. The fact that they are so adamant that they're not feeling, that they're completely objective in all of their views, and yet every single thing they say and do goes against that point. That they're honestly kind of an emotional wreck, and they don't really know how to identify this. I find it's something that's very I think it's something identifiable. I think it's something identifiably human, despite the fact that GUrRL is distinctly not human, not even biological. But I think it's also, I mean, it's also just a joke that I like, but it's a joke that comes from a very true place. I think that's kind of why it resonates so much. That's, you're not just doing something because it's funny, you're doing something because it's funny and it's true. I think also kind of like digging into GUrRL and GUrRL's relationships with other creatures, like GUrRL's relationships to friendship and the other librarians, GUrRL's relationship to the Omninet, figuring out how GUrRL navigates this world and how GUrRL actually exists and everything is, I think, is also something really interesting. Knowing that GUrRL presents themselves as, like you said, something very faceless and very authoritative and very much like I'm completely above everything and I'm just giving you complete facts. But having this personality, having this self bleed through is something really, really fascinating.
Yeah, it's like, and so I remember reading the early scripts for Black Box, and it's one of the things that I feel like is kind of a unifying thread amongst most of the characters that we meet in this universe is that they are kind of governed by emotion, and they're in some ways, I don't want to say immature, but they kind of let their strongest feelings guide their actions, you know? And it's
Yeah.
really interesting to see a computerized intelligence do that, and to see, I assume that pretty much anyone who's listening to this has already listened through to the season. I don't want to give anything away, but there's this like really great character turn that GUrRL takes at the end of the last episode of like making this decision for themselves about what their life is going to be like. That's like not responsible, but also, you know, we've seen up to this point that GUrRL isn't necessarily as interested in being responsible as they claim to be.
And yeah, going to kind of your first point about being governed by emotion, I think that's very true. I think when I was working on Black Box and working on developing the characters of Crab the crab, Starry the starfish, and Desmond the lobster, they were people who were very much governed by emotion and anxiety and all sorts of things. And I think that's that's definitely something that's kind of bled into the ordinal systems, is that you've got a world where emotion is valid. And I think, you know, kind of going on a brief tangent, and something that I'm probably going to say often during this interview is that my goal with the ordinal systems wasn't to create a dystopia or a utopia. It was just to create a topia.
Yeah.
I think it's very easy to create dystopias. That's something that I've found out when working on GUrRL and working on the ordinal systems, is that it's really easy to figure out ways that things go wrong. What's a lot more difficult is figuring out the utopian parts, figuring out the ways that things go right. And because, you know, the thing is, utopias can't exist. That a utopia is just a dystopia for a specialized person. That every dystopia, or rather, every dystopia is a utopia for somebody else.
Mhm.
And so it's kind of this reframing of not like how do you make something perfect, but how do you make something better? And I think having a world where emotion is validated and everybody's kind of governed by emotion, to me that's something beautiful, and that's something that I love exploring,
Yeah.
especially when it comes to something like a computerized intelligence, this AI program. Um, Going back to Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, which we'll probably take a deeper dive into later on, but
Mhm.
it was it's kind of a big part of one of my big touchstones of this project is that book series, and this idea of I'm pretty sure they actually codified it that in order to create a artificial intelligence that was able to exist in this world, they had to program it with emotion. And so you have Marvin,
Mhm.
who's governed by depression. You have Eddie, who's governed by this manic happiness. You have the Doors, who are governed by just absolute sexual desire. And
Right.
this 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 juxtaposition between like these robots who are supposed to be cold and unfeeling and emotion was both hilarious, but also, like I've been getting at, is something very true and something that's something that I'd love to see, I think.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, we're gonna talk more about satire later on in more depth, but this is what you mentioned about like just being a topia, not a utopia, not a dystopia, but just like a world in which stuff goes right and stuff goes wrong, and like sometimes really awful catastrophes happen, but kind of the world keeps going along anyway, which I think is like a source of a great deal of depth in this galaxy. Is it a galaxy? Is a system that
It's a
you're
system, yeah.
telling
It's
us
a
about?
systems
Yeah.
cluster.
Do you have a title for, like, I know that this has been called variously, like the Black Box universe or like the GUrRL universe. Do you have a title for what this universe is? Do you just call it the Ordinal Systems?
I just call it the ordinal systems.
Mm-hmm.
If I'm thinking about like, because like the ordinal systems doesn't include the bugs, the travelers, and where they come from, though.
Right.
So if I'm like thinking about like the galaxy itself is the Milk Path galaxy,
Okay.
but I don't really use Milk Path in my head. Even if I'm talking about
Sure.
the Takalam systems, usually I think about it as part of the ordinal systems, even though they're narratively two distinct places.
I want to talk a little bit about the bugs.
Okay,
The bugs
yeah.
were sort of a late addition to the podcast. I was lucky enough to get to see a lot of the early drafts for GUrRL as you were turning them out, and when you first started writing these, they were very much more like Wikipedia entries that were, I would say, completely non-narrative in the way that they were presenting things. So the bugs were kind of something that you brought in to provide bookending device for the episodes, to provide a little context for like why we're here and why we're listening to this stuff. Can you tell me a little bit more about how the bugs came to be as characters and kind of what you wanted them to be like?
So when I was working on developing this podcast, like you said, at first it was all girl all the time, just like pure Wikipedia style entries. And through getting feedback on these first episodes and hearing how people thought about them and everything, it became clear that I kind of needed a listener point of view character. I needed some other voices in here that would break things up, but that would also be engaging to the listener. That they could, because like GUrRL, it takes a while for GUrRL to warm up and for you to really get interested in GUrRL's character. And so I needed something right off the bat for the listener to kind of hold on to and to feel grounded. So
Yeah.
I started thinking about who this character could be. I originally had the idea of maybe it's a person who engaged in illegal time travel or something like that. Because it had to be someone who would reasonably need to find out this information. And so I started asking, why do they need to know this? Why are they engaging in a very rudimentary view of what these systems are? So I thought about like maybe time travel, but then I started thinking about that maybe they're aliens. Maybe they're visitors from elsewhere in the systems.
Yeah.
I knew that in terms of how bugs and insects work, that they're kind of in their own separate world. That basically when humans sent out the space arcs, they decided they didn't like bugs. They are scared of bugs. They're scared of spiders and beetles and all bugs. So they never included the bugs in the space arcs, except for one person who loved bugs and put an all-bug space arc on his own and sent it off into space. And so in Black Box and in the Ordinal systems, there are a few bug characters that we just see. There's a fly who always thought that he was just a weird bird. And then there's a cocoon or basically, yeah, like a sentient cocoon who later becomes a butterfly, who's an exiled prince and was basically ejected from the Cocklam systems and thrown into the Ordinal systems. So I knew that there were these two characters, and I knew that bugs existed, but that no one, in terms of the normal person in the Ordinal systems, they don't think bugs are a real thing. And so I started digging more and more into this, and it started to really fascinate me. By this time, I had done so much world building, and it seemed like I knew I had an answer for everything in the Ordinal systems. Even things that I didn't consciously write out, I could reason out based off of all the world building I did. But when I started thinking about bugs and who they were, it suddenly became so open-ended. I had no idea how this other systems cluster operated or existed. And it was so exciting and so interesting. I think it was that excitement, this reinvigoration into this world that kind of made me decide that I wanted these characters to be visitors from elsewhere, from the Cocklam systems, who came into the Ordinal system somehow, and they're trying to figure out what this place is and how to engage with it. At first, I was thinking maybe it's just one bug who's here. Then I started to think about it and build out some more. Like I said, I knew that one of the bug characters who existed in the animated series was this fly who owned a bar on a very remote planet in the Ordinal systems that nobody really thinks about, nobody really visits. And this fly, like the ongoing joke is he just says he's a weird bird. And I think he genuinely believes that he's a weird bird. He doesn't know his culture. He doesn't know that he's this fly. He doesn't know he's an insect. He's just a weird bird. He's got wings. He's a bird. And so I started to think about how this character would become existing in this world, where this character came from. And so I decided that this fly character in the animated series, because also, side note, the animated series, I think, if I'm remembering this correctly, the animated series takes place 7 years in the future of when GUrRL the podcast takes place.
Oh, okay.
So there's this time skip that happens. And so I started thinking about how this character came to be. And I decided, okay, well, we're going to see this origin story. We're going to see these flies come into the system. And as I started to figure out how bug culture worked and reason things out and everything, it became clearer and clearer that it wouldn't just be two, that bugs operate under a base 6 system, that bugs have 6 legs. Everything is about 6.
Mm-hmm.
And so it would be this crew of 6 that would come in, visit this system. They're scientists from the Cocklam systems. They're coming in, and they are trying to find out about these worlds for reasons that we'll figure out later. The easiest character to figure out and to start writing the voice of was 6, was the captain. And I think the 0 episodes are basically told from 6's perspective in a way. And 6 is kind of the first voice we hear. 6 is I think 6 is very identifiable in the fact that he doesn't know what's going on and he's kind of panicking and trying to hold everything together. And I think that's something that's relatable, especially as we start to get thrown into the Erdinal systems without really any sort of guide rails. We're just introduced to this vast universe right off the bat. And it's something that's very overwhelming. And I think having a character that is overwhelmed kind of helps, like I said, it's this grounding force. It's this character that the listener can relate to right off the bat. It's a character that the listener can identify with and say, okay, I'm overwhelmed. I don't know what's going on. And here's this person who's overwhelmed and doesn't know what's going on. So I can say that this character is me. And we can listen to this and learn about things together.
If the Erdinal systems are Wonderland, then the bugs are Alice.
So yeah, that was 6. I kind of started reasoning out just base broad strokes who each of these bugs are, and kind of doing broad strokes of how this bug culture works and everything, and what bugs would need, specifically in terms of resources. I came to this idea that we have 6 characters. 6 is the captain. 5 is this ambassador from this other part of bug culture that's not an insect, but is part of what we think of bugs. And actually not even an arachnid, but a house centipede is what 5 is. So something that's been in the Cocklam systems that humans ejected into space along with all of the other bugs, but who is not an insect and who is operating from this framework of being different from everyone else. So that was 5. 4 was kind of the royal guard, because bug culture is governed by a queen, and so everything is centered around the queen. So the queen would send a royal guard with them to make sure that this group of scientists is doing everything well. Then we start getting into the scientists themselves. We get into 3, 2, and 1. 3 is the most scientific of scientists. 3 is the engineer. 3 is just a scientist, a blanket scientist. 2 is more of a doctor, and 1 is the person who, as I started thinking about 1 and 1's voice, because eventually I started trying to come up with voices for these characters and figure out how they approach the world and who they are. And eventually I landed on 1 not necessarily being a nepotism pick. That's not quite right. But 1 is this... It's like if we sent Elon Musk into space because Elon Musk was a business person who was financing everything. But in a more ethical way. I wanted 1 to be relatable. I wanted 1 to be a character who we enjoy, which I think is completely antithetical to Elon Musk.
Right.
So I decided that 1 was kind of this failed business person who eventually started to delve into the Queen's archives and kind of became this person who knows the most about the Erdinal systems and who has researched this and who has all this information and who knows basically everything that the Queen knows about what these systems are. Figuring out who these bugs were just in terms of solid jobs kind of helped me then determine their voices, and eventually they kind of became slightly more well-rounded characters. I think they were still pretty lightly sketched in. I didn't know who the bugs were until I started recording. And there was a lot of character voice and a lot of how they came to be as people happened once I knew who was voicing them, and once I heard their voices and all of that. And now that I have these voices, now that I know more about who they are, I think I'm able to take that and figure out more of who they'll be in season 2.
Really excellent work from all the cast, but particularly the bugs.
Yeah, I really agree. Yeah, I think I'm so happy with everybody who worked on this, from the cast to the crew, everybody. I'm delighted with how this turned out.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, the bugs, they did great work. The work they put into it, and like the questions they asked me about performance and how they approach these characters, it really helped. It really made them feel fleshed out.
Are there works of art out there that have been particularly influential to you in the development of GUrRL and the lore of the Ordinal systems?
Going back to this origin of it being an animated series, the 2 programs that really got me thinking about making an animated series and telling stories in this framework were Adventure Time and Steven Universe. I think these are 2 works that tell these rich, complex stories, but gear it towards a younger audience. And they're 2 works that don't talk down to their audience. Don't treat their audience like they're unable to understand feelings of sadness or feelings of belonging, feelings of identity, but incorporate this into each world and basically allow these young people to know that these things exist and to grow with them. I think that's beautiful. And that's something that I wanted to write. Both of these shows also showed me that it's possible to create a new world.
Yeah.
That it's possible to create something that's never been seen before.
Yeah.
Something that's very, especially with Adventure Time, something that's so idiosyncratic and something that's so unique that it's created this new universe that now exists in so many different parts of media. There are, Adventure Time comics, there's Fiona and Cake now, there's all of these different parts of the land of Ooh and its extended multiverse. And like, it was really inspirational to see new worlds be created and be accepted and be loved by so many people. Also with both of these shows, with like Steven Universe, it was fascinating to see how world building is created with Steven Universe. That it's focused on character beats. It's not about having this external world that characters talk about. It's about having characters talk and reveal an external world. Like, you build a world through your characters. Like, the characters are what your audience attaches themselves onto. That if you don't have engaging characters, if you don't have characters that feel real and feel important, then you're not going to be able to effectively world build. And I think this is also true in Adventure Time as well.
Absolutely.
I think, going to like Adventure Time and the Great Mushroom War, we know that this is a part of the world, but we don't really engage with it that much until we find out that Simon and Marcy existed at the time of the Great Mushroom War. And that's kind of when it starts building up this history and building up everything, is when you have these 2 characters who you've attached yourself to, who you love, who you feel genuine emotion for. These 2 characters exist in this world now. These 2 characters are exploring this space, and so that's what makes you interested in it. Not having some brand new character come out and give a huge lore dump about everything, but having people who you have an emotional attachment to tell you about their feelings about something.
Right. I mean, this is coming back to this our discussion about characters being driven by their own emotions, and I think that's like, it's such a relatable way to think about a science fiction world, and I think it's a thing that's missing from a lot of like really broad sci-fi that has these massive alternate universes, is that it often just feels like, I don't know, like that's the way it is, and it's big and it's impressive that it's big, but we don't really get to hear anything about like, you know, why people wanted it to be this way, or like what did they hope would happen and how does that differ from how things turned out. And I think that's one thing that you've done really well with GUrRL.
Yeah, thank you. I think what I do as a writer is focus on small scale advancements in large sci-fi worlds. Even though GUrRL is about so much about world building and creating this world and introducing people to the world of the Urdinal systems, I didn't want to lose sight of the people who live here. Just the common people who are on these planets just trying to live and trying to make a life happen. How do they feel about these worlds? What's their life like? So yeah, that's something that I'm working on with season 2 a lot, and I'm glad that it came through with season 1.
You know, I come from a world of screenwriting, and oftentimes screenwriters will sort of poo-poo the notion of world building, and they'll say like, look out, you're doing too much world building, or like it can become kind of a navel-gazing activity. And you know, what you're talking about is more like we're following a specific thread, and we're still learning about this world, and we're learning about this like exotic, different reality from our own, but we're learning about it because we're following some people who want to know certain things, and knowing why they want to know those certain things and what their plans and hopes are, makes a huge difference in how we get at that knowledge, and you know, whether or not it's interesting to us.
Yeah.
We were talking about artistic influences. What are some others?
Yeah. So this one, my next one is something that we've already talked about, which is The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy.
Mm-hmm.
I think it would be irresponsible for me to say that this didn't influence how GUrRL is structured. Because with both worlds, there's this massive encyclopedia that exists that explains every single detail about the world. Yeah, I think GUrRL and Hitchhiker's Guide, we start at the same idea, and then I think we go to different places with it.
Mm-hmm.
But it's still definitely there. The humor of both pieces, I think, is also similar.
Yeah.
We've already talked about, the humorous aspect of giving robots emotions and that kind of juxtaposition. But there's also this idea of having these huge cosmic ideas boiled down to something so small and mundane. Like the idea that all of Earth in The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy is boiled down to the 2 words mostly harmless.
Mm-hmm.
Is something hilarious and done to a great comedic effect in The Hitchhiker's Guide. Going away from The Hitchhiker's Guide, but still keeping with Douglas Adams, both me and Douglas Adams are fascinated by animals, and by biology. Douglas Adams did Last Chance to See, which, if I remember correctly, is all about endangered species.
Yes.
And and it's not even, it's just a nonfiction book about endangered species, and it's fascinating. There's I wouldn't be writing the Urdinal systems, and I wouldn't have talking animals in space if I didn't deeply love animals.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's also a touchstone. I think that's also something that's ingrained in this identity.
So this is, I don't mean to spring, this is kind of a big question to spring on you that isn't in our outline, but it just occurred to me. What is it about animals? Like, why animals? You could have made a vast, far future reality with people in it, but why? What do you find compelling about animals, and why did you choose to write so extensively about them?
Yeah, I wanted to include animals firstly because just me as a person, I find animals I don't want to say much more interesting than people. People are confusing and complex, and so strange and mysterious to me. I've got social anxiety as a person. I've been working at becoming better at communicating with people and being able to exist in a framework of living with other humans and other people, but it's something that I've struggled with my life. But I found it so much easier to identify with animals. That, like, when I was growing up, I found it so much easier to relate to my dog than I did relating to other people in my grades. I was already, telling these stories about fish, my fish tank, and making up like personalities for them and figuring out who they are. And yeah, I think it's just something that's part of me, is just being able to identify more with animals. One of the other things is not so much like why focus on animals and not on humans, but why focus on animals instead of creating new creatures, creating these weird alien monsters that exist that are completely different from what we as humans think about. I didn't want to create new beings because having animals that are relatable to us makes it so that I don't have to spend a bunch of time explaining how these creatures work. So what I mean by that, in season 2, I've got an episode about lobsters and how lobsters exist in this world and how their culture has grown and how they exist as a people. If it was some completely unknown alien, I would have to start from zero.
Yeah.
I would have to explain how their biology works. I would have to explain what they looked like. I would have to create this visual picture of what they were and make it so that my visual picture matches your visual picture. And I think I've had to do this somewhat with the Dudo entry in season 1. But like with both of them, they are very real creatures who have existed in our world. We're able to visualize them. We're able to have this reference point. So we're not starting at zero. We're starting from something that we know, and then we're able to build on top of it. And I think being able to start with this baseline of knowledge helps it so that I can get to the commentary. I can get to what I really want to talk about, which are these human stories, these ideas of personhood and of how we relate to ourselves and questions about identity. That I think if I was starting with something completely brand new, it would be so much more difficult and probably a lot longer.
Yeah.
To do. One of the other things I love about animals is this alien way of thinking. That animals are so familiar to us and yet so different. I think the biggest example is the octopus, which is this brilliant, intelligent creature that has grown up in an environment so much different from ours. And yet we're beginning to understand how intelligent they are. They are something alien, truly alien in our world. Like I was saying, it's taking this alien intelligence and this alien way of being, but having a reference point for the listener that I think is important. And I think it allows me to explore all of the themes that I want to explore with this piece.
It strikes me that it also gives you the opportunity to introduce like an immense amount of diversity into the reality of this world, that it's just like a fact of life that a squid and an orangutan might talk to each other and might have to work in the same office or something. And that presents such interesting problems.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, in season 2, we do start to explore how this came to be and how the people of the Erdnal systems began to understand each other as people. And what is personhood in this world, and how is personhood defined? It creates some incredible stories. Not only do you have this diversity, not only do you have all of these different creatures living together, but once again, you have this reference point. Because, with the Hitchhiker's Guide, going back to that, that's a diverse world as well. And you have some very strange beings there. You have a super intelligent color blue in the Hitchhiker's Guide, which is alien to us. But it's alien in a way that even with the super intelligent shade of the color blue, you get this reference point, though. There's something human that we're able to identify with. And I think being able to identify like a cow living with a bat, living with a squirrel, living with a fish, and all of these different creatures all living together, it creates diversity without the need to over-explain diversity.
Yeah.
It sets up a world without needing to take up so much space about explaining how diversity works.
Mm-hmm. It's, if I can draw a comparison to another work of art here, and I see some parallels to Zootopia.
Ooh.
A lot of the world building in Zootopia goes into this discussion of like, not only they don't talk as much about like why we've built a city with all these different kinds of animals in it, but they do talk a lot about like, how does it work, and it's like there's this background thing going on in Zootopia, which is like really committed to exploring the realities of accessibility design, and like, how do you build a train that an elephant and a lemming can ride on, and like what is the what kind of services do different kinds of animals require, and how can they be both useful and useless to one another. And I see some of that going through particularly in the sections that are about IPUS and about this sort of like, the term I would use that's not really applicable here is globalistic, but like a sort of a unified multicultural society that is like maybe not always the reality, but sort of the neoliberal dream of IPUS, like figuring out how we're going to take these often less diverse societies and sort of like cram them all together in one space station.
Yeah, definitely. Like, I'm pretty sure Zootopia came out after I had already started working through the Erdnal system.
It would have been like 2015, 2016, I think.
Yeah, so yeah, by then I had already started developing this, but also Zootopia is a good comparison. I definitely have my issues with Zootopia and with the Zootopia world, but I think it is a really charming world, especially once you start like looking at not only accessibility but also how Zootopia plays with our preconceived notions of animals.
Mm-hmm.
I think it gets a little muddied and confusing, but like you've got the sloth character who's really obsessed with speed and driving fast in his car and everything, and it's fun and funny because you've got this juxtaposition, and that is something that I want to explore in GUrRL and explore in the Erdnal systems, is deconstructing our own stereotypes of these animals and taking what we assume we know as humans and using that as a building block to tell a story about breaking glass ceilings, about overcoming stereotypes, about becoming who you authentically are over becoming what society wants you to be.
Let's see. Before we move on from this question, are there other works of art that you want to talk about, like in reference to GUrRL and to the Erdnal systems?
One quick one that I would also be remiss not to mention, even though I've got a weird interaction with it, is Welcome to Night Vale.
Mm-hmm.
As I've been walking around and explaining to people what my podcast is, the easiest reference point I have is Welcome to Night Vale, because I think if it wasn't the first narrative podcast, if it wasn't the first scripted podcast, it's definitely the biggest first one.
Yeah.
I think.
Yeah.
When it first started coming out and getting big, I didn't really interact with it because that was in the early days of podcasting when I didn't really listen to podcasts and I didn't understand what a podcast was really. But I ended up interacting with it. I ended up following Night Vale through reading it, but I haven't listened to many episodes. But I've read through a good deal of them through the books that they publish, the transcripts of the episodes.
Right.
Which is not how you're supposed to interact with this piece of media, but it's how I've interacted with it. So yeah, I think the popularity of Night Vale is what let me think that I could create a narrative podcast, that I could use the podcast format to introduce people to the ordinal systems and get them excited about this world. I think without Night Vale, there might have been another podcast that popped up to show me this niche. But I think having it be such a phenomenon really helped me to understand podcasting as a scripted storytelling medium.
Yeah, absolutely. I have to admit that I've kind of like fallen out of touch with what Night Vale is doing. I used to be a more avid listener early on, but the fact that they're still going and that they're branched out into other media, books, and I think they do live shows, and it's just amazing that it has connected with people in the way that it has, and it's really encouraging. It's really encouraging to see people listen to that and want more of it, you know?
Yeah, exactly. Because the other thing is, you're going back to like the discussion of Adventure Time and Steven Universe, is that Night Vale is a completely original world that people have engaged with so much and have demanded more of it and have really embraced it and welcomed it. And I think that's also something that was deeply inspirational for me. The last piece of media that I'm going to talk about is an interesting one. It's the video game Hollow Knight.
Okay. This is one I'm not familiar with.
So Hollow Knight is a video game where you're this little bug exploring a ruined kingdom, and it goes through the Metroidvania idea of exploring lore and story through just exploring this world and walking around in it and reading little like enemy entries and item entries in the game and like building up this lore through just all of these details that you can either interact with or you can choose not to interact with. So yeah, the biggest thing for me is that comes to when I was figuring out the lore of how the Cockaloom systems work and how bugs work in this world. I basically kept on realizing that I was writing Hollow Knight. In the Cockaloom system, there's this insect queen who has a bunch of bugs all living together in a crumbling monarchy, and that's exactly the world of Hollow Knight. In Hollow Knight, you have this king, not a queen, but a king, who's basically been overtaken by this disease, and the entire world around this kingdom, the entire kingdom, is now falling into disrepair and crumbling around you. And the engaging part of the game is figuring out how this happened and why it happened and what your role is in this end time. There's also a bunch of other like small bug hierarchy similarities to Hollow Knight. In Hollow Knight, moths are this religious order. They're ones who are able to like see through the veil of dreams and the veil of death and into worlds beyond. In the Cockaloom systems, they're these time-traveling machinists who are able to see through time and see through other realities. They're basically the moths, as we've built them up, are the dodos of the insect world. No, in Hollow Knight, there's this creature called the Weavers, who are these spider creatures who are very different and who are removed from the rest of the game, but who exist in their own little corner of the world. And like going through and exploring this Weaver world and everything is this intense and kind of terrifying experience in Hollow Knight. Yeah, this idea of having this spider race that's been banished and is separate but equal in a way, also kind of ended up feeding into how I understand the Cocklump systems being.
This looks really cool. I'm bad at most games, but I'm probably going to have to play this. This looks fascinating.
Before I started playing Hollow Knight, I watched through a whole Let's Play of it because it looked it's beautiful and it's haunting and it's so great. But I was so terrified that would just be too hard for me. Because it's a hard game, but it's also a game that really builds you up. There are some parts to it where you just have to get good at the game and do good at it.
Yeah.
There are some hurdles that you just have to jump over. But for the most part, the game's great at giving you the resources you need to learn how to become good at it. And it's really great. I've loved Hollow Knight and I've really loved my time with it. And it's been a weird inspiration, but I'm happy to call it an inspiration.
I see you also, in our notes here, I see you mentioned Doctor Who. Do you want to talk at all about that being a reference point for you?
So yeah, like the final reference point that I wrote in our notes was Doctor Who. In terms of how Doctor Who approaches science fiction, I absolutely love it. That Doctor Who is about exploring these weird ideas and understanding that aliens can be alien. That aliens can be statues if you're looking at them. That aliens can be living shadows. That aliens can be just something we don't have a framework for understanding. I think that's something really interesting. But mostly I use Doctor Who when it comes to understanding the Dudos and interacting with Dudo civilization. That I think both Dudos and Time Lords are these beings who have access to time travel and who have built themselves up to being the arbiters of time. And there's always these questions in Doctor Who about whether or not that's right and whether or not there should be this arbiter of time or whether time should be democratized. That's something that exists definitely within the Erdidal systems with the Dudos. Also, as we find out more about the bugs, it's something that definitely exists with bugs and the bug world of Cocklump.
Right. Yeah, it seems like it's yet to be determined exactly how, but it seems like the bugs have, when they first hear about the Dudos, have some frame of reference for what they might be and maybe some fear about them as well, which I think is absolutely justified. I would be terrified if there was a group of people that could travel through time and didn't tell me what they were doing when they did that. I would be terrified of them.
Yeah, and this idea of having time travelers who just kind of set themselves up as benevolent lords over everything. But are they?
Right.
Like, is there such a thing as being benevolent when you have access to so much power?
Right. And it seems like this is another kind of continuing mystery from the season, is that there's a few moments where Dudos kind of redact or override or inject commentary into GUrRL's lessons, and it seems that GUrRL isn't aware that it's happening, which in itself is a little bit troubling.
Yeah.
Okay, we've been going for an hour. Let's take a break. Join me next time when we'll talk more about art we love, Vvinni's fascination with language, and what to look forward to in the next season of GUrRL. Thanks for listening. So long.
This episode of GUrRL, the Guide to the Erdinal Resource Library, was edited by Andrew Gingerich. Do you have any questions or comments about this or any other episode? Feel free to email us at urdguide, urdguide@gmail.com. And follow us on social media, urdguide, URDguide, at Instagram, Blue Sky, and YouTube. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you next week.